And there's a green space.
And you can't see anyone's images, and you can't see anything else.
Can't see anybody else. I can see you, bottom right.
Yeah, if you can see me bottom right, I am really, really happy, right? So, so one thing I'd like to say is if we do that, the final thing is, what are you looking at now?
What am I looking at?
Are you seeing me?
Yeah, I can see you. I can see a map of our said
that's
location.
brilliant. You can see me. That's the main thing. And the only thing I can see then is you. So that's fine. I can't see anybody else. So I would like to start off by saying that Llysworney is very much of a haunted landscape. And for those that don't know where Llysworney is, it's in the Vale of Glamorgan. To give you a good description, it's in an agricultural landscape. It's immediately southwest of Cowbridge. It's below a location known as Pentrym Myrick. Llysworney has its own history, which we'll talk about in a short while. So tonight, I think we will look at Pwllgorach Farm and a wonderful story that I tell people on my Cowbridge walk. But the amazing thing is tonight, I've actually been joined by my folklore and folk stories of Wales, and this is by Mary Trevelyan. We finally found the book, so I can read directly out of this about Pwllgorach Farm. But where is Pwllgorach Farm? Well, the amazing thing is, we will be showing you via an aerial photograph. One thing about Llysworney is that it's got a wonderful old church, and we will be visiting that wonderful old church. And on the wall, alongside the porch of Llysworney Church, is a carving, and that carving itself is something that we will examine as well. We'll also talk about Moat Farm. And Moat Farm itself is directly associated with the name Llysworney, the place or the palace or the location of the Werney family. That's where we're going to start. With all the windy roads going in and out of Llysworney, we can paint a picture of everything heralding down towards the church. The church is the central axle of the village, and it's got a lovely little pond there as well. And some of those nice little lanes that lead down to the church, you can get an ambience of what the landscape was once like 10 years ago, 100 years ago, 300-400 years ago. And now we're looking at an aerial photograph of the village of Llysworney. The road on the right is the road that leads from Pentrym Myrick all the way down to Llantwit Major. And you've got some interesting names, Hoyle Cowell, and you've got Tyle Malley. And I'm actually an archaeologist who's actually worked in Llysworney. And there you find the church. While I'm in Llantwit Major, I always quote something that I always remark back to Llysworney. And what remark back to Llysworney is that Llysworney was once described as the little village with lots of lanes leading to the church. And it's quite easy to believe that, because on the aerial view, you can see these little lanes, one leading from the Carn Arms, and one leading from this road that leads all the way to Llantwit Major. And all these little lanes that seem to go west and go north and go south. If you go somewhat towards the north, you lead towards Colwinston. And we can't do this story tonight about Llysworney with missing out Colwinston. As some of you may know, there's links with Agatha Christie when you think about Colwinston and that Polchergrach farm. And one of the things I want to do tonight is actually refer a lot more to the history and the archaeology, as well as painting a mythical and legendary landscape. When you're standing in amongst these lanes of Llysworney, it's quite easy to shut your eyes and you hear me describing stories about the Black Shuck, the legendary Black Shuck. Basically, the Black Shuck itself is a very black dog. Many people have seen the Black Shuck, and I'm actually a person who's actually seen a Black Shuck. I've seen a Black Shuck at Merthyr Mawr, in the lane which we refer to as Beech Tree Lane. I saw a Black Shuck not so many years ago, but it wasn't the terrifying Black Shuck that is linked to this very village that we're looking at today. Again, moving on. So you're looking down into the village of Llysworney from an old-fashioned aerial view. And when you sort of squint your eyes and you sort of look at this type of landscape, and you look at one or two of those lanes, one of the stories associated with the Black Shuck of Llysworney is that if you should go down these lanes late at night by yourself and you see a Black Shuck in front of you, you will never leave that lane. And it's said that many people cry out and then they disappear. But there's a rather strange thing about stories like that. If the Black Shuck kills you, how are you able to tell the story about the Black Shuck in the first place? And when we look amongst these lanes of Llysworney and we look towards the church, with the modern day lighting and away from that modern day lighting, with a moonlit landscape, everything illuminates. Even though you've got these dark stories associated with Llysworney, one of the things I have to say, I've never felt any real deep negative entities associated with the landscape. It's a rather interesting church. The interesting thing about this church is that it may not be the original church for Llysworney. It's a church set in a quarry. And that stone from that quarry was used to build other structures in the village. And it's interesting to remember that after those other structures were constructed in the village, then the church was built in that quarry. But an interesting thing about the whole story is that for a village to exist like this, it would have needed a church to start off with. So the location of the original church at Llysworney was obviously somewhere else. And with the Norman family, the Werney family, given its name to the village, they would have proudly proclaimed themselves to have established a much earlier church, sometime in the 1100s. It's a very hodgepodge, higgledy-piggledy church landscape. An archaeologist excavating at Llysworney not so many years ago naturally did find some old sets of bones whilst excavating in a church graveyard, which isn't unusual because people have been interred within these landscapes for a very long time. How far this church dates back to, and the relationship it has with the quarry, the dates, like most of the churches in the Vale of Glamorgan, are very difficult to track down. And when you go into the church graveyard and you head towards that porch, there's a rather interesting thing, which we see with lots of churches in the Vale of Glamorgan. You look down at the floor, and what you do see is you see slabs set into the floor, there are old gravestones. The reuse of gravestones is something that we see throughout the landscape. And talking about that landscape, what I'd like to do is look at one or two stories that I've found within Mary Trevilian's A Glimpse of Welsh Life and Character. So as I open these pages in these publications, if you ever manage to get a copy of any of these publications, take you back to 1900, the 1890s. This one book in front of me, it dated 1893. She was a wonderful woman, Mary Trevilian. And we've actually got a Mary Trevilian ghost evening coming up as part of these lectures. And we sort of celebrate her life. And this was somebody who went around the Vale of Glamorgan collecting these beautiful, colourful stories. And it's something we all miss, isn't it? When we're children and when we're 15 or 16, we're surrounded by those old fuddy-duddies in those villages. And those old fuddy-duddies in those villages and those towns have usually got wonderful stories. And I forgot to write down most of the stories that I was told when I was a child, and I wish I'd recorded lots of them. But Mary Trevilian took it upon herself to record the landscape, the folklore and legends and the myths of this wonderful breathing land of Wales and the wonderful breathing land of Britain. Again, this isn't a nationalistic lecture of prose. She says folklore and ghost stories, like seaweed drifting hither, upon the restless tides, the folklore of a land drifts from place to place and is subject to many changes. Nearly every county in Wales has, with few exceptions, the same folklore, diversified by local colouring or adapted to surrounding circumstances and scenery. Thus, we find the weather law varying with change of district, change of parish, change of location. In the mountainous parts of South Wales, clouds hanging heavily around the craggy summits that rear their lofty heads to the skies are said to portend fair weather. While if distant mountains are clearly seen, rain may be expected. All along the seaboard of Glamorganshire, people say, if you see the English hills distinctly, you may be sure rain is not far off, while a dense haze enveloping the seven seas is indicative of fair weather. And you know what? We've got to mention again, as I do every single walk, every single evening, that I entertain you with these stories. I mention a fella known as Llysworney Ghost, Edward Williams, the bard who sang, the bard who wrote extensively, like Mary Trevilian, 100 years before she was writing her own stories down. From village to village, she would write these stories, like Edward Williams, Llysworney Ghost, a shopkeeper, a stonemason, a bard, a person who invented and made history to make us see history from those myths and legends where there's facts waiting to be seen and heard. Mary Trevilian goes on about Edward Williams. When the proud waves of Severn are roaring aloud and Penllyn's lofty towers are involved in a cloud, if true the old proverb, a shower of rain is brooding aloft and will soon drench the plain. Penllyn isn't far away from Llysworney, actually. It's about 3.5, 4 miles away northeast from Llysworney. So you can imagine, and back in the day, back in the times of Edward Williams, the towers and wonderful landscape was still of a Norman ilk at Penllyn. Another Glamorganshire weather proverb runs thus: when Breaksea Point doth roar and cry, Charleston Lane is never dry. And it again sets the iridescent landscape that is Llysworney. And do you know what? One of the very cheeky things I like doing is climbing into the towers of these churches in the Vale of Glamorgan. I've been in this church tower. It's rickety. It's old. The bell is sat there. And you see the connection with within these towers. There's bits of oldness. Look at this tower from the outside now. You see a tower that's been rendered today. This is an image from the 1960s, but today it hasn't changed much. It's been re-rendered. Wonderful story about this church. The Kettle family, Reverend Kettle, he's a man who abseils from the top of the tower to render the walls. He's quite a sight. He's quite a character. And these villages have those characters. Within that tower itself, I'm describing where the platform is, where the bell sits, and it's sort of, there's loads of little bits of old branches. It's quite rickety and it's quite strange. And you see towers like this throughout the Vale. You see them at St. Athan. When you go into the tower at St. Athan, you go there by invite. And I don't know if anyone's ever been to a church called Llanfranc, which is again the same side that this is in relation to Cowbridge. If you go immediately southwest of Cowbridge, down another road towards Llantwit Major, there's a little old church hidden by the cross inn down there. There's a little old church and you can see it. And if you get into the tower, oh, that is really rickety. And in a way, when you go into these towers, it's almost as if the outside hides what's inside, hides the oldness, and you can smell the old wood, and you can see the dates and the bells from the 1600s and recasting from the 1500s. And this is really steeped with real history. We take it for granted, and we've all of us taken everything for granted now when we're indoors. And we miss these little villages, well worth a parking up and a little looking around. In my own book, I mention Llysworney and the oldness that is Llysworney. Do you know, can I share a little story with you? You won't find this in any books. Many, many years ago, and we're talking about in the sort of 1986, 1987 time, many years ago for me, I remember that people used to say about Llysworney, and he used to say something very strange. And I'm not sure there's any truth for this at all, but it's a very, very strange story indeed. They say that Llysworney was the capital of the Vale of Glamorgan in the Iron Age. It was the place to be. It was the place of history. It was the place of knowing. And therefore, when you think about all those saints, St. Tidville, of course, the association with Llysworney, and then when you talk about St. Illtyd and St. Caddoc and all these wonderful saints, Llysworney is one of those draws. Llysworney is a place of oldness. Was there an old monastery at Llysworney? Let's go just back to the Iron Age again, over 2,000 years ago. It's said that there was a huge hill fort at Llysworney. Nobody's ever found it. But why have they been saying these things about Llysworney? It's quite central in the Vale of Glamorgan. It's quite a convenient place. And then you actually go up the road, and with this old map, going all the way back to the 1700s, late 1700s, you got Mynydd Vychan. And there's something rather interesting at Mynydd Vychan. And you know what? I'm going to tell you, I've been to Mynydd Vychan, and it looks like there's very deep Roman and Iron Age remains at that locality, just south of Pentremyric, between Bridgend and sort of between Cowbridge on the old Julius Maritima, the modern day A48. And when they excavated at Mynydd Vychan, just north of Llysworney, they've got lots of Iron Age Roman pottery, and there's something else hidden in those bushes. There's actually what looks like the remains of some kind of medieval castle. But be very careful when you go to Mynydd Vychan, because it's also the site of a modern day nudist colony. So sort of don't be wandering around there because the police might be called. Back to Llysworney as well. You're looking at this old, sort of very old, you're not going to get much better than this actually from the original map if I had it in front of you. Very shaded, very faded when you look at Llysworney on there. But all these little windy lanes, again, the microcosm then is all little windy walkable lanes to the church back in the medieval period. Each of those villages in the Vale of Glamorgan has a tale to tell. And like Llysworney, like Colwinston, like Langan, like St. Mary's Church, and like Landau, all these different places, they've all got those sort of associations with sort of old Christianity. But by the advent of Cromwell's new parliament in 1650, that is all old Christianity at Colwinston and Llysworney is destroyed. Crosses pushed down to the ground. The altar slab at Colwinston, just down the lane from Llysworney, is dragged out and placed into the church graveyard and used as a gravestone, some say. So anything of the old Christianity is destroyed, but some of it is refound and reinvented by the likes of Edward Williams when we look in about 1790, 1800. So we move on a little bit further. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Llysworney Church, but there's this. It's fascinating. And I've looked at this time and time again. If I can zoom in a little bit more. If you go alongside the porch at Llysworney, and you sort of look a little bit further over on the nave wall, you see this. And it's a very strange inscription. It's an in-relief inscription. And I've looked at this many times, and I've felt that sort of, when I say inscription, it's telling you something. There's a language with this, and it's very out of character. It's not a typical Vale of Glamorgan carving. It's almost as if they've just tossed it in there. And in the medieval period, they would have rendered it over. Nobody would have saw it. But what's happened? The render's fallen off. In the Victorian period, for example, they had this fashion in the Vale of Glamorgan for ripping out the old window fenestration and the door fenestration, replacing it with the new Victorian stuff. And they would rip off all the render, all the whitewash, all the hundreds of years of whitewash, all those individual layers that have been built up and dealt with on the church wall over generation after generation. And under some of this sort of render, under some of this whitewash, gems can sometimes be revealed, and this is one of them. And when I've looked at this, I've looked all the way back to Anglo-Saxon stuff. I've looked all the way back, and this isn't a meter in length, for example, people. This isn't huge. And I've looked at this and I thought there are parallels with this carving and Anglo-Saxon carvings over the border, with churches going all the way down into Kent. And I've matched this and I thought, hang on a minute, we didn't really have the Anglo-Saxons in Wales, so where has this come from? What actually is this stone? It's very old. And I haven't really got an idea of the understanding of this stone. It gives us a message, a lost message. This is part of a larger monument. I've heard another archaeologist describe this as some kind of old lintel for another building, i.e. tying in with maybe the story that this is not the first church in Llysworney. Just like Llantwit Major. The church in the centre of Llantwit Major is not the original church for Llantwit Major. And I'd like to say the same about Cowbridge. The early church for Cowbridge has never been found either. That's one for you historian and archaeological buffs. Let's move on a little bit further. Let's get a little bit more into the story, and maybe a ghost story coming up soon. Looking again at the south wall of this, and you actually you're looking at this. Actually, the north wall. Where am I? The north wall of the church, and it's a very strange shape. There's a very strange orientation. It's almost as if being tossed in there, tucked into this quarry, with all these little graves around it. And where's the old graveyard, the other old graveyard associated with Llysworney? And one of the things, as an archaeologist, when you look at Llysworney, is anyone doing any work in Llysworney requires an archaeologist to be there, just in case that old early stuff is found, just in case there is any truth in the Iron Age stories, with this being the original capital of the area in the Iron Age. Is there actually a proper Iron Age hill fort there somewhere underneath Llysworney? It would seem to be quite fitting, actually, because when you drive north to south from Pentram Myrick towards Llysworney, it almost as if you go into a dip and you go up again. And then you sort of, it's almost a strange locality. There's all that intermingling. There's lots of rock there, the rocky surface, the rocky landscape of the hinterland that we see within Llysworney. And do you know what I'd like to do? Time has come for a ghost story. Time has come for a ghost story. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do the story I tell associated with Polchagroch Farm. There's Polchagroch Manor, Polchagroch Farm on the map. So follow the cursor. You've got Pentram Myrick, Cowbridge over in the on the right here, which is in the east, Llysworney on the south, and there is Polchagroch Farm. Some say it's Agatha Christie's Hollow. This is where she bases it, and she stayed there and all these other things. But I'd like to do more about that when I do Colwinston. I tell you what, I like the people of Llysworney, but the people of Colwinston are very strange. Very much are. Anyway, when you think about it, again, these stories about the Black Shuck. So go from Llysworney, follow the cursor, and you go up these little windy lanes, heading towards Colwinston. Don't go down this lane at night. It's really spooky. You know, it's very dark with the trees and stuff around you, and very marshy. Sort of, you can get an idea of Will-o'-the-Wisp. We have stories tonight about the corpse candles as well. So Polchagroch Farm. When you think about Polchagroch Farm, if we move a slide on a moment, there you go, Cowbridge. So again, back again, Polchagroch there, and there you go, Cowbridge. So you can imagine the story's set about 1800, and we're going to do my version, a bit of our Mary Trevilian, and then we're going to do Mary Trevilian black and white. Okay. So the first bit of the story is mine. So initially, there was a huntsman, and the huntsman himself decided to go out on a jolly towards Cowbridge. And when I'm getting confused with the days, but somebody said to me very recently that they used to count the pubs. There used to be about 28 pubs when they used to count the pubs in Cowbridge over about 50 years ago. There's usually about 28. About 200 years ago, there was 100 pubs in Cowbridge. It was a town of pubs in the main high street, which is sort of over towards here. And if you look in the distance, look at the distance on here, right? Gone off on a tangent. This clump of trees, that tump, is St. Hilary Down. There are St. Hilary masts and Stalling Down. And that's the alignment of the Roman road. So you bring this and you bring the Roman road and sort of come in towards you. So the huntsman, it said, left Polchagroch Farm. He walked all the way to Polchagroch Farm. Start again. He walked all the way from Polchagroch Farm to Cowbridge one day. And he decided to go for a drink. And then one drink led to another drink. So again, 200 years ago. So he went into another pub, it led to another drink. And before we know it, he'd been on a complete jolly. So he woke up the next day and he thought, right, I'll go on another drinking spree. And this went on for, it said, 5 days. He went on a drinking spree. And in the background of the story, when he left the Polchagroch Farm as a huntsman, a few days earlier, he forgot to feed his hounds, and he forgot to water his hounds. So after 5 days has gone by, he's suddenly woken up this one day on the Saturday, and he thought, oh my God, I've been in all these pubs. I've been drinking on a complete bender for 5 days. And then he realizes he's left his hounds without any food and drink, and he needs to get back because the following day is a Sunday and it's the hunt. So, so what happens is the rest of the story is Mary Trevilian's. I usually do my bit of the story when he heads back towards the farm and he doesn't hear anything. But we're going to put Mary Trevilian's part of the story. So as he's heading towards, so we go all the way back. He travels all the way out of Cowbridge, down the old road, towards Pentremyrick. He hits the lane, heading towards his farm, Porchagrach Manor, which leads towards Colwinston, and then you can go down the lane to Llysworney. This is it. In a story formerly attached to Porchagrach, it is asserted that one of the huntsmen was approaching the kennels one evening. This is on his way back from the bender, when he heard the wild barking of dogs in the air immediately above his head. It was twilight, and no animals were at hand. The hounds in the kennels were silent. Wow. And it goes on. Presently, the unseen dogs barked again, and somebody called, "Tally-ho! Tally-ho!" It was more like a wail than a cry. When the sound was repeated, the huntsman responded with a wailing, "Tally-ho! Tally-ho!" It was more like a wail than a cry. The next moment, all the pack of hounds in the kennels broke loose, surrounded the huntsman, and tore him to pieces, so that nothing but bones remained. People said it was the revenge of the Cwn Obir, whose cry the unfortunate man had imitated. So in other words, the Cwn Obir, he had imitated the cry. He had basically entered into the cry. There's a very important thing there. In after years, the peasantry declared that often in the night time, the cries of the huntsman and the baying of hounds could be heard distinctly. It was stated that the huntsman had forgotten to feed the hounds, and they fell upon him and killed him. The kennels were pulled down because of this calamity. The spot is still called the Old Kennels. Now, I haven't told you the rest of the story there. And the rest of the story goes as follows. This is my bit of the story. There's a bit more gory. The reason why you could hear the hounds is simple. When the huntsman entered the kennels that evening, I sometimes say the day, different versions. That evening, he opened the gate and he couldn't see the hounds. He may have heard them, but he couldn't see the hounds. And it's right to say, we agree on this, that he hadn't fed the hounds. And as he went towards his front door, the hounds set upon him. And the only thing that they could find the next day are the bones of the hounds, the bones of the man, after the hounds had gnawed away at his flesh and everything else. There was nothing left. And the reason why you can see the hounds, you can hear the hounds, the reason why you can hear the hounds in their ghostly form is because on the Sunday, when all the other huntsmen turned up to enter the hunt, and in seeing the bones, they butchered the dogs. And that's why you can hear the hounds crying out at night. And Amy, what is it I always ask people on my walks in Cowbridge?
Always ask them, Oh, goodness, what do you always ask them? Walks in Cowbridge. Keep
I
an
al-
eye out for keep an eye out for hearing the howls of hounds.
yes, and do you have sympathy for the huntsman or the hounds?
Oh, of course, yes. You should have sympathy for the hounds, obviously.
I don't think you've been on I think 2 or 3 of the Cowbridge ones, and nobody has had any sympathy for the huntsman. They all say that the huntsman deserved what he got every
Yes, he
single
does.
time. Yeah, he does. He does deserve what he got. Really did. Anyway, so moving on again. And what we're going to do now, we're going to do a little bit of archaeology, okay? And I'm just going to remind myself of another set of stories I would like to tell you from my little book. I'm just going to check the other ones. I can still see these ones here. Yes. Ah, nice. I can remember that one. So I'm just going to make sure I can remember that one there. And it's the, and one of the things that I keep going on about is about the corpse candles, which I will be telling you about tonight as well. So now what we have, a bit more history and archaeology, is spot the church. We'll zoom in. And there's our church. And there you've got a pond, usually with a load of ducks. And there you've got the village pound. Now, the village pound is a rather interesting structure indeed. And what the village pound is an area that, well, it's debatable what the pound is actually. Some say it would be a place that you'd bring sheep or cattle to gather to go to market, but it's usually not big enough. Usually it could be a place that's where you take your cattle or your sheep because it's a way of paying your taxes. Some say it's people, your sheep would be rounded up there because you hadn't paid your taxes in the first place. There's lots of ways of interpreting the village pound. And when you think about it, really, these narrow lanes and the church and the pound and the village pond, all these are really important when you think about the village structure within the Vale of Glamorgan. But if we go a bit further north of here, we actually look at Moat Farmhouse. Now, if we got a little image, hang on, the image for Moat Farmhouse isn't here, strangely enough, which is a bit of a shame. But that there, I've got an oldie-worldy image of Moat Farmhouse. For some strange reason, it's disappeared. That is Moat Farmhouse, and it's a rather interesting building. And the reason why it's a rather interesting building is it's sited directly on the original manor house of the Llysworney family, the de Llysworney family. Now, one thing is that the Llysworneys were a Norman family that settled within this area, hence the name. And it always makes me think, who was actually living in Llysworney before the Llysworney family came here? This is one of the great debates, really. Throughout the Vale of Glamorgan, you find that all the villages, when you look at the history, you always find the history begins in about 1100. And then you go all the way back and you go to the Roman period and the Iron Age period, and there's nothing in the middle, which is very confusing. You're thinking, well, did anyone actually live in the Vale of Glamorgan before the Normans? And the answer is, of course they did, because the Vale of Glamorgan is a very rich agricultural landscape. And lots of what we do know is lots of the monastic landscape was established before the Normans. It's almost as if, for some strange reason, the Norman world is the only world that was ever here. So we can actually think that maybe there's actually some burial mounds near here towards the east. And those burial mounds are from any period, where we're not really sure when those burial mounds are from, but it's actually directly linked in the past. And this is a rather interesting site, because these trees here, you can see these trees actually hide a ditch, and these trees hide another ditch, and there would have been another ditch going along here, and there would have been another ditch going along here. You can see a bit of a faint line. And it was a square platform with a ditch around the outside. This is as many Normans built their new manorial granges, their new manorial settlements in and around the Vale of Glamorgan. But what was there before, we can only hazard to guess. And it's a shame I don't have any more information than that. What I'd like to do now is I'd actually like to go on to the story of the corpse candle. And I've told this a few times. I've told the story about the corpse candle a few times. So I'm going to go to our little book here by Mary Trevelyan, and we're gonna talk about this. And here we go. The origin of the corpse candle is supposed to date back to the 400s, maybe the 500s. Saint David, the patron of Wales, earnestly prayed that the people he loved and among who he toiled should have some kind of warning to prepare them for death. In a vision, he was told that through his intercession in Wales, his involvement with the Welsh, that the Welsh should never find again themselves unprepared. Unprepared for what? I mentioned this before. For always before such an event, the people in the land of Dewi Sant, the people in the land of Wales, would be forewarned by the dim light of mysterious tapers when and where the death might be expected. St. David apparently prayed particularly for South Wales, because it is said the corpse candles are seen more vividly and frequently there than in North Wales. So let's go back to the other image. I've mentioned will-o'-the-wisp many times, but this isn't will-o'-the-wisp. These are actually corpse candles that actually gather above you. The corpse candle was seen along the route to be taken by a funeral, or hovering around the spot where an accident would happen, or fluttering or hovering along the edge of the waves where a wreck would be. When two lights were seen, two funerals would take place. A tall light foretokened the death of a man, a lesser one for a woman, and a small one for a child. So I think this is rather interesting that Saint David, Dewi Sant, extended the different levels of these candles. You had one for a man, a tall light, a lesser light for a woman, and a very small candle for a child. So in a way, we're talking about lights hovering rather than candles themselves. But in lots of illustrations, you actually see a candle hovering with a light above it. The colors of the lights varied. Before a man's death, a red glowing light was seen. Interesting, that, a red glowing light. A pale blue light indicated a woman's death, and a faint, pale yellow light appeared before a child's death. Innumerable stories of corpse candles are to be found in all parts of Wales, but the south provides the greatest number, as nearly all of these tales bear a striking similarity, with only the difference of location. The following will serve to represent the whole. So in passing a golden grove from Llandilo to Carmarthen, several people in the 1700s saw 3 corpse candles gliding down the river at various times, 3 weeks in succession. 3 is rather important. The persons compared their experiences and wondered what the omen meant. Was it for the villagers, or was it for the noble family who lived at Golden Grove? At length the solution came. 3 members of the nobleman's family died simultaneously in different parts of the country. And then we look at the sycamore tree. The sycamore trees of Llysworney and elsewhere. Mysterious light was seen glimmering in the corner of the field where the branches of a tall sycamore tree made a deep shadow. For quite a year, winter and summer alike, this light appeared and was seen by several persons who commented upon the strange occurrence. The light glimmered in the corner about 2 or 3 feet from the gate leading into the field, and was always seen between dusk and dawn. At last the mysterious light disappeared, and the very next day a gentleman much respected in the district came to his end by a fall from his horse. He was hunting, and while taking the gate, fell over his horse's head and was killed, and the very spot where the glimmering light or corpse candle had been seen. Now, what I would like to do is I would like to tell you one last story. And this, we have to bring in the Gracker ribbon. And on this moment, you will see me. So I'm going to stop the screen. We're going to stop the sharing, and hopefully, the only face you should see is me. Amy, is the only face you're seeing me?
Yep.
Can you see anyone else's faces?
Mm-mm.
Oh,
You're in.
I
You're
am
in the.
I am in full now. Michelle said to me when I did this story tonight, she said that I should actually have candles either side.
Yeah, that would be.
Adele, am I the only person you can see? Fingers up, thumb up. I like being the complete center of attention. Isn't that right, Karen? So, one of the stories that's very very deep and very much entwined with the Vale of Glamorgan is the story of the Gracker ribbon. And I like to tell the story of the Gracker ribbon because when we think of the Gracker ribbon, we hear stories of a winged figure, and this winged figure would fly down, and it would be a gnarly looking old crone with very red eyes. And if you should ever see the Gracker ribbon, you need to move away quite rapidly. But always when we think about the Gracker ribbon is there to take your life. You must always allow the Gracker ribbon to take your life. And we keep being told that when stories of the Gracker ribbon are abound. There's a story about the Gracker ribbon with the village of Ystrad Owen, for example, which is towards the northeast of Llysworney, on the other side, north of Cowbridge, actually. This story of the Gracker Ribbon is a gentleman is followed by the Gracker Ribbon as he walks along the path very near Ystrad Owen. And as he looks beyond, the Gracker Ribbon's getting closer, and as he looks behind, and suddenly the Gracker Ribbon catches up with him and touches him. And then within days, this gentleman dies. Now, I want to tell the story of the Gracker Ribbon, which very much is linked with any village in the Vale of Glamorgan. And one day, the Gracker Ribbon was abound, flying around all the villages in the Vale of Glamorgan, Llysworney being no exception. I always tell this story associated with Mar Cross. I always tell this story associated with Monk Nash. But it's a general story. One day, there was a gentleman, and he happened to be sitting up in bed, and he had one candle burning. And this gentleman had a friend in the village, and I usually tell it of his brother, but he had a very dear friend in the village, and it was his very best friend who lived in the village. And he was aware his friend had gone away, packed his cases. His friend had gone away for some time and would be back in the future. Anyway, this gentleman was sat up in his bed, and he was looking out of the window, and he was on the first floor. And as he looked through his windows, he could see a red light. He thought that was interesting. The lights that you would usually see across this landscape would usually be yellow lights. It would usually be the light of the moon, but this was nighttime and this was a red light. What is this red light? And he looked towards this red light, and suddenly this red light, through the glass, through the fenestration, he could see two lights. And these two lights were close together. And he looked at these two lights, and rather interested, couldn't work this out. And as he looked and he stared, he could see the face of a witchy-like person. He could see the face of an old crone, a battered old face with old straggly grey hair, silvery hair. And then she started screaming. And then the hounds in the village started to howl. And then he could hear foxes in the distance. You know, that very eerie sound foxes make. And all these different sounds he would hear. And then there would be the hounds of hell he could hear as well. And this old crone was screaming at him. He would be looking into her eyes, and she was screaming, pointing at the window. You must open the window, my dear friend, and let me in. I am the Gracker Ribbon. And he would be looking and thinking, I am not going to open those windows. I'm not going to let you in. My door is closed. You are not going to come in. You are not going to take me tonight. And he realized who this figure was. And he knew that if he was up all night looking into the eyes of the Gracker Ribbon, by morning the Gracker Ribbon would disappear. He knew all the story about the Gracker Ribbon. He knew it all. And he knew if he did not allow the Gracker Ribbon to take his life, the Gracker Ribbon would take the life of somebody who he loved very dearly. But the person who he loved very dearly had gone on holiday. His best friend, the only person he loved in the village, he'd gone on holiday. That's it. Okay? Very good friend. He loved him very dearly. He'd gone on holiday. That's fine. So as the Gracker Ribbon howled and she screamed out and so on and so on, the hounds were yelling out and barking and the foxes in the distance, and it went on. The standoff went on until 6 in the morning, and suddenly he fell asleep, and that was it. He woke up and there was a big bang on the door. Bang, bang, bang on his door. Bang, bang, bang. And he thought, oh, I'm alive. I'm alive. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. I'm alive. Everything's fine. It's brilliant. And he goes down to his main door. He opens the door, and somebody's standing there, and it's another person from the village. And he said, did you hear the hounds at night? And the gentleman said, well, yeah, I heard a few hounds. The other man said, well, do you think it could have been the Greco ribbon? And he said, no, it definitely wasn't the Greco ribbon. If it was a Greco ribbon, the person who seen the Greco ribbon would be dead, surely. And they had a bit of fun over this, right? And they chatted away. They had breakfast. They had something to drink. Everything was fine. Went into the kitchen. Everything was fine. And then what happens is that they get together and they say, why don't we go around the village and see if anyone's dead? Come on, let's knock everyone's door and see if anyone's dead, So they knocked every single door in the village and everyone answered. And they said, well, that's fine. Good. I'm glad you're there. Brilliant. And the last house was the house of the gentleman's best friend. And the door was closed. And they thought, no, let's not knock the door. He hasn't come back. And they pushed up against it and the door opened. They thought, this is strange. Very strange indeed. And they looked into the corridor, and in the corridor, there was some baggage. And then the gentleman realized his friend had come back early, but the door was open. So they went back outside. They looked up and one of the windows was open. And the gentleman thought, my dearie me, do I think what I'm thinking? Anyway, they went upstairs, they opened the door, and the friend was sat up in bed, looking out at the window. The window was open, and the candle was still burning. And he thought, this is strange. It's gone past 11 now in the morning. Candle's still burning, a window's open. He sat up in bed. So they went to the front of the bed, and the guy was dead. You could tell the guy was dead because it was almost as if all the life had been drained from this very being. He looked gaunt. It was almost as if, and it looked like the person had been lying in bed for weeks, and a metamorphosis had set in, and the person looked like he'd died many days ago. And that was the effect of the Greco ribbon. If you ever do see the Greco ribbon, always allow it to take your own life, because if you don't allow it to take your own life, the Greco ribbon will take the life of a loved one. And that is a very, very powerful legend in the Vale of Glamorgan. In closing about Llysworney, if you ever get a chance to go to the Carn Arms, again, that has its own ghosts haunting the Carn Arms. It's got an old appeal to it. But never be left alone wandering the old lanes of Llysworney at night. Because if you do see a black shook, you will not live to tell the story. So what I'd like to ask now, what I'm gonna say, it has been very sensible tonight, so I might open some of the mics and we can have a little bit of a discussion. Amy, are you still there?
I'm here.
I know Ellie wants the mic to be open so she can have a chat with her dad online. So we will allow you to do that, Ellie, but not yet. So before we open some of your mics, I'm going to mention that we will be doing next Saturday. Next Saturday is Llysworney. At Llysworney, we'll be looking at the Priory. And Amy, I will have to let rip what happened to me that night, not so many months ago, and it's going to be quite frightening, isn't it? Do you want to introduce a little bit of that story for next week, and then don't say any more? You do that little bit.
Okay then. Last time we were at Llysworney Priory, something happened to Karl. He went missing for a while. That's all I'm going to say. Because it'll give away too much.
I think it will give away too much. I think it will. So we'll be looking at Llysworney. We'll be looking at Llysworney next week, and I'm gonna mention that on Wednesday, if anyone's interested, we start a history and archaeology of Wales season of lectures for 8 weeks. So if anyone's interested in that, stay on when everybody else is gone. So keep your sort of image on, and we'll have a chat about that. If anyone's interested in my book, The Ghosts of Glamorgan, then let me know. That will be available. And just mentioning as well, we have never done a walk of Colwinston because of the entities in Colwinston, and there are a few things about the church which is quite strange as well. But maybe you can ask me about that again. So I'm going to put Mike. Your mic is on, Goff, and Ellie. Ellie. I knew an Ellie years ago. You're not the same one, are you? And it's Sue.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, right. So, has anyone got any questions tonight, please?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the pound. There's a pound field in Llantwit.
There's lots of them. And you're well, that's quite a big field actually, but a pound itself is usually a small enclosure the size of a medium-sized room. So that's basically what a pound is, and pounds have interesting stories associated with them. So when you're up there in the landscape, you sometimes have references toward a sheep's pound in an upland area, and they've got various different uses for a pound, which usually to do with the lord and the manor taxation, and it's a rather interesting thing. All villages would have had a pound, all villages would have had a village pond, all villages would have had a church, all villages would have had a manor house. All villages in the Vale of Glamorgan were structured very similar to Llysworney, where all these little lanes lead to it. And when we did the ghost walk in the last walk that we did in Llantwit Major before the shutdown, I mentioned about all the little narrow lanes leading towards Llantwit Major Church. And if you can imagine, that's what the landscape was like in the Vale of Glamorgan. Any lanes wider than about 2 meters in the Vale of Glamorgan was a highway. That's what we're talking about. Very difficult to access these places with large carts. Anything else anyone want to say?
Yeah, you mentioned that Karl-james is haunted. What's the story there?
Now, the Karl-james, you've got ghostly entity upstairs in the Karl-james and downstairs in the Karl-james. I haven't really. Lots of people talk about the hauntings at the Karl-james, and one of the things I want to get into a little bit more nitty gritty is actually the true background associated with the ghost in the Karl-james. And it's been a pub that's been used for a very, very long time, and in a sense a hostelry as well. And you can imagine the Karl-james is one of the remaining hostelries in Llysworney, and it's obviously got those stories to tell about it. And one thing I'm going to do is, for the Karl-james, I'm going to look a little bit more into the Karl-james for you next week. Anything else? And that's a good one. That's a good one. Any other questions, folks?
I can't see me.
Well, just now,
what about you, Barbara? Come on, let's have a word from you.
well, just now when it was only, we were only supposed to see you, I could see everybody.
Yeah. A bit spooky, isn't it?
No, my sound is switched off, isn't it? Yeah, my sound is switched off.
But you just have
I talk through that one.
Carl, your mic is switched off.
You are right. Okay. So Del and Barbara, I thought you could only see me.
I could.
No, I can see all of
I
you.
switched everybody else off.
Ah, right. That's what. Okay, fair enough.
You can switch people off.
Okay, fair enough.
Oh, I didn't realise that.
Yeah,
All right. Now
you
we
can
know for next week.
minimize those little blue circles. Minimize or whatever.
We know for next
Haven't
week.
got any blue circles. Have you got any blue circles?
What I'll do, I'll find a way of doing it for next week. Right. Okay. Right. So does anyone? Right. What I'm going to do? Anyone else want to say anything else? Because I turned all the mics up. So if anyone wants to say, right, Sophie, go for it. Bingo. Unmute. Hang on. We can all hear you.
Hi. Okay. Not really a question about the talk, but Amy, what was going on with your wardrobe earlier? I don't know if anybody else could see, but I could see Amy.
I was just messing around with my banshee, that's all.
All right, because I was like, what are you doing? It looked very strange.
Right. Does anyone else want to say anything else tonight? No?
Me
Okay.
and you are still not visible.
John, I don't know what's going on there. Oh, hang on a minute. And what I'm going to do is we've got our Bulgarian friend. Pam, anything you want to say? It's just over to you.
No, just to say you can't see me. I could say I'm a ghost, but no, because I haven't got a camera.
Okay, not a problem. And what I'm going to do is just for Ellie and her dad, right? We're going to have Ellie and her dad, and they can both speak together. So Ellie and Dad, anything you want to say tonight? You two.
No, I've already checked with him about the Kraken, and I've said he definitely has to let it take him before it comes for me. So he's aware of that.
Hang on a minute. Hang on a minute, right? We're supposed to be. No, that's really. I can tell you've got a deep love for your dad there. Oh, I can see. That's the deep love. Cool. Right. So I'm going to ask three questions. Are you all joining us next week, folks?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Depends on the virus.
What do you mean depends on the virus? Hang on. Right. What do you mean depends on the virus? That's a silly thing to say. Okay, then. What we're going to do? So I'm going to ask again. Is everybody okay to join us next week?
Yeah.
Yes.
Possibly.
Oh, shut up about your blooming virus. Oh, by the way, in this, if you go anything by what Ellie's just said, if the cracker ribbon goes to her, she'll send it over to you.
All right. She's got to cross the Severn Bridge.
It's something to do, isn't it? Anyway, thank you for all taking part this evening.
Thank you.
It was my pleasure. You've been a wonderful audience this week, and as I say, if anyone wants to stay behind and have a chat about Wednesday evening and the new course then, or the next Saturday, and those that take part in my classes, i.e. Del, Karen, and Sue, and Goff, normal as usual for Thursday. So those that want to go now and need to go, don't have to ask any questions, put your thumbs up.
Yeah, okay.
Goodbye.
I think it's probably all of you. So what I'm going to do, thank you very much. I'll see you all next week. Those that are going out. Good night, Goff, Barbara, Sophie, Karen, John, Pam. Bye-bye. Thanks for coming.
Bye.
It's echoey. So who are we left with? We're left with Barbara.
Good meeting.
That's not the Barbara I know.
Right. So what about you, Amy? Did that go well tonight?
That went well. I enjoyed that. My connection actually stayed with me the entire time because I found a better place now.
Good.
Yeah, that went good. What do you think?
I think that went better. Yeah, I think that went a lot better.
Yes.
But the thing
Did
is,
you enjoy my?
Yeah, the thing is about the yeah, I should have been the only one that people could have seen, actually.
I could
Oh, you
I could
weren't.
only see you.
So John, could you only see me?
No, I saw everybody else except me.
Right, but
Oh,
for
and
most,
user I couldn't see.
but for most of it, you saw the images that I was bringing up on the screen.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So
yeah.
it worked tonight, so that was better.
Yeah, but I can't see me. Still can't. And it says the reason is because you've blocked me.
Blocked you?
Yeah.
Where?
If I go to switch the video on, it says I can't because you've stopped me.
Well, I can't work this out. Don't worry. Right. Anyway, not a problem. Right. So, anything anyone want to say before I go?
Yeah. What's this?
Did you like my banshee?
Yes. Yeah, that was good. That was good.
Yeah. What's this thing going on Wednesdays now, and what's the timings? And
Right. It's the archaeology and history of Wales from 7:30, and that is that's a separate. It's for 8 weeks, and it's a set course, and that's 30 shekels for the whole 8 weeks.
Right. Okay.
That's every single Wednesday, and that's 7:30, and it's a set course, and it's very different from and it's very different from the other classes, and it's very different from what else we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
So let me know.
I might have some family members who will be interested, so I'll contact them. That's why I kept tips on it.
You've got the links on that?
Mhm.
Okay, I'm just gonna. So that was good of Sophie joining us.
Yeah, she really enjoys it.
Good, good. I'm just gonna double check the accounts to make sure she's paid.
She should have.
I'm hoping. Hopefully the link's okay. Anything else you want to say, John?
No, you want me to go, don't you? I can tell.
Not really. Right. Sophie, she hasn't paid a £5, so can you get on to her about that? It's not up here. Amy? You there, Amy? Amy, she hasn't paid her shekels, so if you can get on to her.
There we go. I'm back.
Right. So if you can get on to her about.
Yeah, I will. Don't worry.
Yeah, just I tell you what, if you can phone her after this and just text me back, okay?
Yeah, no problem. I was going to say, are you going to include that footage next week?
Which footage? Oh, that footage. I am not sure. The reason why I haven't got that bloody recording to you is that because it's been so busy, I haven't been able to do it, basically.
Okay, no problem. Don't worry.
Right, so that's that. So okay then. Well, I'm gonna call it a night.
Okay.
So yeah, that's it then. So nothing else you want to ask me?
No.
Okay. All right then. Who's going first?
Me.
Okay. Night, John. If you want to do,
John.
if you do want to do Wednesday, John, tell me on Tuesday.
Yeah. Might be better than by email. No, text.
Yeah, I don't think Anna likes you.
No. I'm not keen either.
All right then. Okay then. All right then. I'll let you go, John. Amy, I'm going to go as well. So can you chase that up with her, and that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll do it right away.
Okay then. Cheers, Amy. Bye. Night.
Goodbye.
Bye bye. And a meeting. That was good. I think that was good.